All right, everyone. Eric Longo here, Executive Director of MCN. I am pleased to welcome you to the final day of MCN 2021. Here we are at the end of this 5-week marathon that MCN 2021 has been. As you've noticed, we shaked things up a little bit this year, trying to be responsive to the challenges presented by the pandemic over the past year. We introduced some pretty bold changes to the format of the conference. You've noticed shorter days, shorter session duration. We introduced 6 main tracks organized in digital practice areas. We added a global track to the program, inviting museum tech professionals from 4 global regions to share their experiences from their unique regional perspectives. And we added a daily and a global recap based on the observation that often pearls of wisdom are generated during those events and conferences, but that we didn't always do a great job at capturing the learnings. And so this global recap aims to remedy this. And so to help me do that recap today, I've invited Lauren Vargas and Ross Parry, as well as leads from 6 of the main conference tracks who you recognize to join us. So let's dive right in, shall we? Lauren and Ross, over to you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Hello, I'm Dr. Lauren Vargas. I am an independent researcher currently affiliated with the University of Leicester 1x1 project. And I am, for a visual description, a female in her 40s with glasses, a dark shirt, gray blazer in front of a bookcase. Ross?
Thanks, Lauren. I'm Ross Parry. So I am Professor of Museum Technology in the School of Museum Studies at the University of Leicester, and prefer pronouns are he, him, his. And I'm, in terms of visual description today, I have dark hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a white shirt in front of a bookcase with snazzily coordinated LEDs, the same color as Lauren. We are very privileged to be here and very honored to be here and have this opportunity to actively listen to those conversations, those tracks, those narratives that have been weaving through the last 5 weeks. So what Lauren and I want to do to start off with is to step aside and to listen and to make room for those extraordinary track leads who've been giving so much generously over this last month, and listen to their thoughts and to listen to the way that they're beginning to synthesize and to build some of those take-homes and some of those learnings. So we're going to start our relay over the next sort of 20 to 30 minutes. And so Victoria, can I turn to you?
Thank you very much, Ross. That's great. I was very excited when I was approached to be the co-lead with Chris Barr, and we had a wonderful learning experience doing that together. And I just wanted to say that in terms of what some of the highlights were for me, I really enjoyed the Pratt session on building user experience. And I also really enjoyed the visual exhibition presentation by Spencer University folks. And one of my big takeaways was a question. I think a lot of people were asking this question. Are we owning our own technology platforms? And what are the implications of a rented platform like Facebook, YouTube, in the communities that might go away? And what kind of archiving makes the most sense? So to me, that's a very large question that goes across many of the different sectors within museum work. And the other thing that was another big takeaway for me was this essential skills, soft skills matrix that was talked about at MCN, the senior, mid-career, and entry level. And how do we build that into our programming on an ongoing basis? So those were some of my key takeaways, and I thank everyone for this opportunity. And I believe the next person is Lynn.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for whoever you zooming from. My name is Lynn. I work at Museum of Modern Art, so I co-lead the track of business model, financial sustainability, and capacity building. That's a very long name, with Martin Franzini, who is actually the chief of digital product and experience at the National Gallery of Art. And we have, in our track, we have 5 extraordinary sessions cover the topics from digital publishing to the survey of the education programs and the revenue generation. And our key takeaway, I would say, is even we are in the track of business model, we are still have this dilemma of how museum could make generate revenue, but not decrease its accessibility. So there is a very rich and long conversation between people about how we can actually charge people, but actually not make people still make the education programs accessible to most people. And additionally, we have very long conversation on the alt text. It's an accessibility issue, that how can we make an online collection accessible to the majority of people. So that's two takeaway. And to that end, I will turn it over to Melanie for her track.
Hi, I'm Melanie Garcia-Simpson, and I work at the Block Museum of Art at Northwestern University. I'm a Filipina and white woman in her 30s with dark hair and glasses, and I'm here representing the interpretation, storytelling, and education track, which was co-led with Lindsey Green. The track had a wide range of topics. During the recap, we did a temperature check, and people were feeling both energized by colleagues' work and overwhelmed in thinking about the past 18 months and where we're going. So I have a few key takeaways. If you ask different people, they'll have different ones, but here are mine. One is our digital audience has changed. For those of us who work at smaller, more local museums, we found new international and national audiences who we don't expect to set foot in the museum. We're also thinking about how our in-person and virtual audiences do and do not intersect. Two, during the pandemic, there's been a real experimentation and openness with trying new things, sometimes out of necessity to get content online quickly, or a lack of resources, but there's also kind of a fear that we'll be less experimental as old processes return. Three, we're all excited about new forms of collaboration that are taking place, whether that's internally between departments, new forms of content creation with our audiences, and real relationship building with our partners. And all of this kind of leads to four. These kinds of deliberate changes have real budget and timeline implications and challenges that we're all navigating, and that staff capacity is real and not infinitely expanding, as has come up in a lot of the tracks. So I'm looking forward to this discussion and passing the mic to Marty.
Hi, thank you. My name is Marty Stullerberg. I am a light-skinned male sitting on a sofa. I was part of the ethical responsibilities of museums track along with Suze Anderson. I just called it Ethics Day. We had 5 excellent panels. We had personal ethics versus institutional ethics discussion, 2 panels about accessibility and inclusive design, a follow-up on museums' BLM commitments that they made. Did they follow up? And a panel on unionization. Lots of wonderful discussions, difficult questions, such as what are the mechanisms, institutional and personal, that people use to identify and reflect on ethical issues in our field? How should museums assess possible harms and benefits of different technologies in their work? How do we surface ethical conflicts of interests that you may be aware of as an individual, but your organization is not? Lots of questions about institutional accountability, who's making decisions, what level of risk are they taking on, what kind of follow-up do they perform, what is the public trust, who is it for? This gap between professional concerns and the concerns of board and leadership, and discussions of how to talk about ethics inside the museum versus outside. What do you take out? What do you engage your audiences in? Are they ready for it? So this was my third, by my count, my third ethics conversation at MCN, we've tended to have one of these each year. My impression was that this year, whereas last year we were really talking a lot more about outside relationships, how do we deal with big tech and the ethical implications of that. This year we really looked inward, which was amazing. There's a lot of talk about turning this into a year-round discussion. It's great that we've had a few years of this, but some participants expressed interest in developing a Muse Tech Code of Ethics. And so looking towards the future, we collected several, we said anybody who would like to talk about this going forward, please send us your info. We collected some names, and maybe we can turn ethics into something like a ongoing SIG. So so thank you. Okay, on to Barry Joseph.
Thank you, Marty. Hi, everybody. I'm Barry Joseph. It was my pleasure to co-lead the Experience Design and Immersive Tech track with Robin White-Owens, co-founder and creative producer of Media Combo, and Sam Minnelli, project manager of Meta SRL. And together, I want to share on behalf of the three of us, the 10 key things that we heard come out of the individual presentations and the conversation that was held at the end. Number 10, we shared ways we can each stay informed about what's happening in our spaces. That's always important, and we should all make sure we get to do that with each other. Number 9, we discussed how experience design and immersive technologies are crucial ways for museums to create relevance for their audiences. Number 8, we are concerned about the brain drain in digital spaces that nonprofit and often medium and small museums have to compete with in regards to commercial opportunities for professionals working on the digital edge. Number 7, a quote to share. I find that audience-focused / design practice seems siloed in digital in museums. Everything okay? I'm hearing somebody. Want to make sure I'm all right? Good, I'll keep going. I'll go back to the beginning of that quote, forgive me. I find that audience-focused / design practice seems siloed in digital in museums in a super problematic way, end quote. The concern here is that these practices need support and buy-in from senior leadership. So if it's seen as just one practice for one part of the museum, the practice can't spread and its impact can't take hold. Number 6, our work is all about promoting audience-centeredness, audience-centeredness. Number 5, exhibition designers must have a better understanding of their audiences, why they come to museums, and what they're looking for. They must design for everyone from an inclusive and an accessibility standpoint. Number 4, expect to see more AI used in museums. Number 3, watch for the review and reassessment of current collection catalogs to address structural bias. Number 2, expect to see climate changes and social topics addressed more frequently within exhibits. And number 1, there is hope that new technology can help museum professionals to better connect with and understand their audiences. The trend is toward more immersive storytelling using many different technologies. Thank you. I'd like to pass it now to Lindsey Green, who's going to talk about why museums.
Thanks, Barry. I'm Lindsey Green, founder of Frankly Green and Webb, and I co-led the track, Why Museums? I'm a white woman with dark hair, shoulder length, and I'm sat in my attic. I was co-leading with Wided and Carolina, and possibly not surprising, at the end of a track that was called Why Museums, we actually ended up with more questions than we possibly did answers. I think the pandemic, so I'm just going to summarize it in 3 points, and I'm also going to just introduce Carolina. She did a great discussion around reflection on this moment that we're in. So the question of why museums, the pandemic has highlighted how centering the physical experience to some extent reduces our capacity to deliver online experiences, and how online experiences require us to think about what our value is and what we center very constructively, in order that we don't proliferate content that perhaps isn't as valuable to our audience as it is to us. And so this asks really the question about what we invest in terms of what is important, that idea of budget as political document, as something that states what our purpose and what it is that we value. And so when the pandemic ended, the pandemic hasn't ended, but when lockdown ended and we've started opening the physical experience again, the idea of budget shifting to digital, because it was seen as this very strategic moment where online in particular was very valuable. In many instances, the budget hasn't kind of followed that initial incentive. And that brings us back to that question about what it is that we value in terms of being a museum and organisation, and what our purpose is. There was another kind of key theme that kind of came up to me, and it was, how is this cycle continuing? I think before the pandemic, we had lots of questions about how I can do better, how I can be a better person working in a museum, and how I can deliver things in a better way. And then there's gradually been a move to this idea of, well, actually, this cycle, is it the organization that's kind of keeping this cycle in place in terms of how we behave and how we treat our audiences and how we treat the people internally? And what I heard in these sessions in particular was actually, as people who are part of the system, about part of the museum system, what is our role both in keeping this system in place and this cycle in place? So as people who work in the sector, both what is our role in changing things, but also how can we pull levers, make changes in our organizations that moves things forward, and how can we individually start to think about new futures so that we can start to set new visions for what museums can be. And that kind of question about how we collectively work together, I think Marty just described it there, but how do we work together to change mindsets and behaviors in the sector? What is it when we come to collectively together and say, actually, we're going to imagine a new space that centers very different things from what we have in the past? How will that change the systemic patterns that we're currently in, and keep and move things and move to this, use this transitional moment really to bring about a new future? I'm going to just hand over to my colleague Carolina momentarily, who will talk a bit more about how the space felt.
Thank you, Lindsay. So I'm a Latina museum professional with curly hair, light skin, and a blur background. And I just want to add that in our session, there was a lot of silence, but this silence was like full of like frustration. And most of the people who participated expressed like their frustration and how people are burnt out in the museum professional. It could be because of the digital environment, because of how things have speed up. And also people are disappointed by the lack of accountability that museums have had in terms of labor and social justice issues. So it seems like people need more space to talk about this, to speak up. It was a great opportunity to bring this topic to the forefront. Usually it is, no one talks about it. So we felt that it's time to talk about labor justice in the museum sector and how we are more accountable, how are we more responsible of our work environment, of our team members, and also like the big invitation is to work together. It's more in fellowship because we are not alone. We are a huge, like a bunch of people who are passionate about what we're doing, but we're not feeling comfortable in the environment. So the question is, how can we gather together to speak up and make sure that we are all happy and that we're all having a quality in what we do? So I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay again.
So thank you, Carolina. Eric?
Thanks. So one of the probably most notable change that we've introduced, or innovation really, that we've introduced this year, really taking advantage of the fact that we are virtual again, and virtual means there's no boundaries, was to introduce in October on Wednesdays a focus on 4 regional areas of the globe. And we started on October 6th with an Asia Pacific panel, which was held late at night on Eastern time zone. And we had 3 panels, one with Tim Kong and Leonie Samutui on the Digital Pacific project, which basically helps to capture and celebrate the cultural heritage of the people of Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia, which was a really fascinating session, and on how they are bridging worlds and communities over the Pacific region. Then we had a really interesting panel as well with Chris Lee of the National Gallery of Singapore, Lee Tanner, who is the head of the, I forget, the Museum 2050 in China, and then Takashi Kudo, who is a communications director at Team Lab, together with Fei Liu, who was a staff writer at G Culture and Commerce. And what I've learned from this was the digital maturity in Asia is very notable, obviously, especially there's, I think when China was created in 1949, there were like something like less than 50 museums, and there are now like well over 2,000 or 3,000, if not more, museums in China, which most of them are actually private institutions. So it's a very different model, but the dynamism that came out of that session was really interesting. And then Chris Lee talked to us about the different experiments that he's done very successfully at the National Gallery of Singapore. And to close the Asia Pacific panel, we had Keir Weinsmith and Lizzie Muller from Australia talking about digital cultural leadership. And one of the quotes I like to mention on this is that they encourage us to look at leadership as action rather than roles. Then we jumped to the following Wednesday. It was October 6th, and this was Middle East and Africa. And the story there for me is one of contrast. I was in a session with 4 people from the Nigerian National Commission for Museums and Monuments, and the challenges in infrastructure and bandwidth in Nigeria are really notable. And in contrast with the digital cultural landscape in the Arabian Peninsula, we had 2 panels from Qatar and also from Abu Dhabi. And what was really striking there is the really advanced digital maturity, and as well as the forward-looking kind of digital vision that Qatar has for its future as a country. And there was another session on the cultural preservation in conflict zones that was led by Peter Erdrich and Alice Rubin. And this was a fascinating session on the state of preservation of antiquities in those in Iraq and Kuwait, and how the Digital Antiquities organization that Peter leads in Washington is basically teaching communities how to digitize their own culture. And I think there was a parallel there with the Digital Pacific Project in terms of documenting the cultural heritage that is often oral and not necessarily artifact-based culture. So a story of contrast there for me, I think. Then we moved to Europe. It was kind of weird, like, Europe was kind of always included in the US, but it was its own region in its own right. And we had a few sessions there, one on the National History Museum of Denmark. Toriel Hagren did 2 sessions in the hybrid museums. And these, to me, were about how the pandemic forced a digital pivot, and it raised issues of sustainability and scalability of platforms and also infrastructure in museums. And yeah, that was also, I think, something that there was some parallels there with some of the digital maturity in Asia. And then we went to Latin America for the first time as well on the 27th of October. And we had 3 sessions, one on building digital capabilities at Museo de Arte de Lima in Peru. And I was in conversation with Concha Roda and Ana Marty on small and medium museums that are thriving in digital. And then we had a fabulous panel with Andres Roldan, Ana Marty, Americo Castilla, and Florence Croizet on the kind of current horizons of Latin American museums. And I was struck by the dynamism and forward-looking experiments that was done in that region, and as well as the issues of accessibility in remote communities that is forcing practitioners to think beyond digital platforms and using, transmedia like television or radio or WhatsApp to reach different communities in that region. So that was also a really enriching panel. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed that world tour, or that Follow the Sun tour, which was the idea initially. I was really happy that we were able to do that and invite within the MCN community, practitioners from other regions to share their perspective in their own words. So I will now pass it on to Ross and Lauren.
Thank you so much, Eric. And I hope there's going to be a moment later on where the community gets to turn to you, and everyone turns to you and says thank you, not just for everything you've done audaciously and creatively and ambitiously over the last 5 weeks, but all that you've done for MCN. I'm sure that moment's coming. But my goodness, four regional perspectives, 5 weeks, 6 tracks. It's been an extraordinary and unprecedented conversation that we've had over this last month or so. So this is the bit, isn't it, where someone who looks a bit like me and speaks a bit like me and has my cultural identity and has my sort of job kind of grabs the microphone, and everyone having had their word, they synthesize it. This is the expectation that at this moment, someone like me summarizes it all and closes it down and gives you the right answer. And we all go away with a soundbite and a golden diagram, an acronym, hopefully 3 words and an alliteration across the 3 words that summarizes everything. We're probably not going to do that now. I mean, we're not going to do that now in the next 20 minutes, and we should stop doing that now from this moment onwards as we come together as a community. But Lauren, let's maybe respect the question we were set, and let's respect the conclusions that we're starting to form together, because there are things we can say, aren't they? There are ways we can start to form some conclusions here.
For sure. I mean, I know that there are definitely red threads that we saw and that all of you just heard across the various tracks. I think if we start to think about what those red threads are, all of us are familiar with the 3 pillars of people, process, and technology. And this isn't a judgment of the past, but we have prioritized process and technology over people in years past through different means, right? Seasons change. We've looked at efficiency and effectiveness and, gone all the rage with whatever new technologies are coming up or are front of mind. And I think what we have heard across all of the different tracks is that everyone agrees people need to be prioritized over process and technology. Now, we don't have all of the answers. We know that this is tough work. It may be very tempting, at this last session of the conference to want to close one chapter and move on to the next. But we have to understand what it is we are trying to grasp and better understand about people so that we can create better processes, better technology. Meaning what we heard over and over again is maybe even before we start to get even more curious about our audiences, our visitors, the communities that we serve, we have to first give notice, give respect, acknowledgement to the people within our own organizations, all of the museum workers, really thinking about how people influence process, what people need, their challenges, their issues, their desires, their needs, and let that influence the processes. And rather than think about those processes that are purely based on efficiency and effectiveness, it's making space for communication and collaboration, making space for thoughtful and considered reflection. I think something that I personally heard across all of the tracks is that we've got this toxic relationship with time. Because technology is moving so quickly, we are being expected to do more and more, even before the pandemic, right? And how do we make sense of that? How do we make sense of that in what we do, what we produce, but more importantly, what is our capacity? What is the emotional labor that is evident in this approach? And that toxic relationship with time has also surfaced this toxic positivity. And that's like a key phrase that's come up during the pandemic, where we want to just say everything's great, everything's wonderful, we're doing the best with what we can, rah, rah, let's move forward. And that's not necessarily reality, right? Like we are in the messiness, we are in the thick of things, and we just have to maybe hit the pause button and understand our different contexts, our different conditions, the different pace layers of change that we are having to reckon with. So as we talk about people, it's not just understanding our individual journeys, it's understanding our journeys as a group, as a team, as an organization. How do we reckon with that so that we can create a better experience for our audiences, for our visitors, where we can get to know more about them. We can create those better processes. We can develop fit for purpose technologies. And even more importantly, how do we find the time, the space, and the courage to question how people are interacting with those technologies? What does experience truly mean? And getting curious about what are those unintended consequences of those experiences, of those interactions with technologies. And I think that's something that I think we can all agree, people, was a red thread through everything. There were no simple answers. There were no simple challenges or questions. I think we all left with maybe more questions than we had maybe coming in to the conference. And I think that's a good thing. And I think we have to think about those red threads within our own personal contexts and conditions. Ross, what about you?
Well, I'm absorbing what you've just said, Lauren, because for a community and a subject and an area of practice that for so many decades was about getting the technology to work and thinking about the hardware and software, and over the last generation has been thinking about process and business process and strategy and vision and policy and so on, to now hear all of our track leads just then, and just hearing across the 5 weeks, again, people, and just Carolina's last powerful statement still ringing in my ears, it's about people. It's suddenly we're realizing there's a human dimension to all of this, and that doesn't just mean our audiences, it means our workforce as well. And we've started to notice that it's people in the museum that drive this digital change. It's not just the machinery. But let's look at that question of what is digital now. Well, our wonderful panel here, our wonderful leaders here have helped us to notice how diverse and complex our question now is to what is digital now. Victoria, by that reference to the thing, who owns the thing, you've reminded us that for many years, digital is a noun. It's a thing, it's the asset, it's the record, it's the material, it's the content. But, Marty, referring on how we build trust within that ethical context, you're helping us to see that digital, it's another sort of dimension of something. It's a quality, it's a characteristic. Digital is a thing that isn't tangible. It's something we're still trying to process within the museum. So digital isn't a noun, it's also an adjective. It's a thing that describes the quality of many of the things, the characteristic of many of the things that we have. But my goodness, listening to Lindsey and taking that panoptic eye across all of these conversations and thinking about, why and where and how museum, we hear digital is so inextricably linked to change, to making, to the realization of something. And that's when digital is a verb. It's something we do. It's an act of transformation. Melanie, in what you said about those new forms of collaboration, and that place we might go, suddenly we notice that digital, as well as a noun, as well as an adjective, as well as a verb, it's a preposition to extend this tortuous grammatical metaphor to the point of a rupture. Yeah, it is, it is a dimension, it is a medium, it is also a place in which our work takes place and that we meet our audiences and things are made and produced and explored. And that can be safe and that can be contentious, and so many other of those conversations we've had. Parry, you said AI, machine learning. How many times did we enter a room over this last month and a conversation pinged up that had artificial intelligence referred in some way, and then we remind ourselves then, as you've done so helpfully today, Parry, that digital is also, it's becoming a logic. It's becoming the way that ontology, that net, that mesh, that connector between assets and descriptors and subjects and objects, it becomes a conjunction. It becomes actually the thing that's between everything else. Digital's the glue. Digital becomes the plugs, the sockets, the things that connect our ideas, our thoughts, and us together. But Lauren, that powerful statement about saying, we have this toxic relationship with time. The sessions I went where I heard people talk about, this digital age, this digital era, this time. Digital is also a word we use to describe when we are, not just where we are or what we're looking at. Digital is also now a tense, the digital age. It's a way of signaling a moment in human history, a shared moment, well, shared for many people, not everyone, in our digital histories as well. But Carolina, in your comment at the end, Marty, and you talking about identifying ethics issues, but Melanie, also your incredibly important qualifier and rider on what you said at the beginning, where you talked of how energized and yet how tired we all are. Digital, that reminds us that digital, as well as being all those other parts of speech, it's also wrapped up now in our sense of community. It's wrapped up in a word I heard a few times, this commons that we're part of now. It's wrapped up in our identity, how different people that we work with identify themselves, how they create their identity in the public domain. As a noun, as an adjective, as a verb, as a preposition, as a conjunction, as a tense. But maybe digital is also a pronoun now as well, so inextricably linked to who we are and how we present ourselves to the world. So digital is more than just those boxes now that we plug in and try and make talk to other boxes. We now know through these 5 weeks, but also just hearing and listening so attentively and actively to each other, that digital is our grammar now. It is the parts of speech. It's the way that we make sense of the world. And it's now immersed within all of our working practices. Let's give ourselves that 3-word acronym though. This is what we're meant to do in a closing discussion like this. For me, it's been about hybridity, equity, and sustainability. What we're hearing again and again is negotiating the fact that our world is becoming layered and intersectional and multimedia and blended and online at the same time as we're there with each other. It's that hybridity that we're starting to reflect upon. It was there before the pandemic, but it's now we're sensitized to it even more. We now think about digital and the equity and the inclusiveness and the diversity and the accessibility that must non-negotiably be part of all that we do with all those parts of speech around digital. And it's about making sure that everything we do with digital, not just how we preserve the content for future ages, but actually the energy drain, the resources, the extraction that's required to power this machinery and this electronics, that we're aware of that consequence. So it's about flexibility, it's about fairness for tomorrow. Hey, Lauren, we could have finished it there, couldn't we? We could have just said that actually there's our closing remark, and we could have left the stage and do what we sometimes do at events like this and say, there you go, everybody, there's your answer. But something's changed this year, and something's changed in this conversation. So thank you, Eric, for framing this and making this possible with all of the MCN community, because we're ready now to have different sorts of conversations. Lauren, maybe it's time that we don't close and converge and do what you and I just did, maybe now it's time that we're ready at the end of a discussion like this and a coming together like this to not converge, but diverge. Maybe it's not about competing to who knows the most about what's coming next and what's new. Maybe we just need to stop and look and see how we are now. And maybe at a moment like this, especially when we're in this synthesis kind of finale crescendo moment, it's not about performing what we know. Maybe it's about being vulnerable about what we don't know. What do you think, Lauren?
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, it's not just about celebrating what we have achieved, because I think everybody has done a brilliant job over the last 5 weeks in doing just that. But at the same time, we're also acknowledging all of the work that still needs to be done, the discussions that need to be had. There's that temptation, right? As we said when we opened this conversation, that just jump right into that call to action. And what we really need right now is to give ourselves the permission to pause and reflect. The permission. Look around virtually the room. Give permission to yourself, give permission to everybody here to take that time, to take that space, to figure things out, to question, not to rush to judgment, not to rush to solution. But what does that mean? And in doing so, how might we move beyond, framing a set of shared conclusions, saying, all right, this is the most ambiguous, broadest set of takeaways possible, and understand that we have to reckon, we have to rumble with being able to give ourselves the space to understand the questions, the concerns, the challenges, the needs, what we were introduced to over the last 5 weeks, to understand them on our own terms, knowing our context and conditions. What does that actually mean for us, so that we can make that change that we seek, model the behavior that we seek? So that's noticing a lot of different things, Ross, about how we might reflect on what has been and what might be. So as we move into our final couple of minutes of our time together today, what Ross and I really want to do is we want to have you enter the next hour of open space discussion with a couple of prompts. Because as we said, there are no easy answers, there are no easy solutions. And we really need to think about, when we come together like this, how might we come together in a different way? So some of the questions, some of the prompts that we want you to consider over the next hour, the next day, the next month, week, year, is what does it mean to have an inclusive conversation? What does it mean to have an inclusive conversation in a digital first or digitally augmented space like we're here in today? What does it mean to have such a conversation or to be in dialogue when we are in an environment like this, where we're constantly jockeying for position on the chat panel, trying to get our thought, our question, our comment in, rather than what does it mean to be in dialogue, to actually have a back and forth conversation where we're taking in multiple perspectives. Ross, what's another prompt we might offer up?
I think it's about understanding how we may need to self-assemble now as a community of practice. We have, as I say, in an unprecedented way, tried to frame at MCN this year a transnational conversation. So we were all probably exhilarated by meeting colleagues we haven't met before, by hearing about projects and policies and infrastructures that we don't hear day to day. But when we choose to be in a transnational space, responsibility comes with that. We have to listen in different ways. We have to notice different things. We have to challenge our own assumptions in different ways, and not assume that the conversation will not only start in a particular place, but will be structured in a particular way. So when we excitingly start to bring in the opportunity of a transnational conversation, so not international, just hearing someone in your national context from another perspective, but genuinely using the network space to have a kind of, as a boundary object where we can come together, we need to think carefully about how that's framed. Even whether this a gridiron of portraits on a screen with certain protocols and codes of behavior around chat and raising hands and to and forth and microphone and video and who's got LEDs behind them and books to make them feel, to kind of perform in the right way. We have to question all of those things. So Lauren, I think as we go forward, we have an opportunity to think about not just how MCN and other communities of practice create a clearing in the woods for a moment like this, but even whether the conference idiom is appropriate anymore.
So we're not ending with the big finale. Ross did give you an acronym, gave you alliteration. And if you know me, I never walk away from a good acronym, but we are asking all of us to really take time, the space, the energy to reflect on what we don't know. What does it mean to truly be open and transparent? How do we heal from the inside out and the outside in? Once we better understand our own context and conditions, how do we hold space for multiple perspectives, understand the context and conditions of others, give people grace and compassion as we're learning at different speeds, at different times, in different places. And so the questions we want you to take away into the next hour: who is missing from these conversations? Why are they missing from these conversations? How might you continuously reflect on these questions, not just in the next hour, but in the days and weeks to come? Who wasn't present from your organization? Or if you're a freelancer like myself and you don't have a team to rely on, who can you go to? How do you make space to have these difficult conversations where we have to show our vulnerability? We have to say that everything is not great, or that we have a lot of areas that we have to learn ourselves. What do we do to be able to hold that safe space in a community of practice like this? How do we question what a community of practice is? How do we start to build those bridges between different communities of interest or activism that can help further our conversations, to help further our goals? So those are the types of questions that are going to lead to those pragmatic, those practical, and those audacious actions as we move forward. Not just the two people that riffed for the last 20 minutes, or even our 6 track leads, but it's all of you figuring out, and maybe figuring out loud together, what the next steps mean for all of us. And with that, Ross and I are going to turn it over to Eric to close us out and move us into the next hour.
Oh my goodness, I don't even know where to start. That was intense. Thank you both for doing this recap together and with our 6-track leads. We have a few minutes before the top of the hour, which actually is a really good, the next session, which is open space discussion. It's her first attempt to do this, and Don Youngberg will lead that session, but it dovetails perfectly with this recap. It's about continuing unfinished conversations, and what other topics might you wish to explore during MCN 2021 but wasn't? And are you looking for other attendees who might have the same questions as you? So I think it's a good segue, but since we have about 10 minutes before kicking off that session in earnest, and there are so many of you here present, I wanted to, if any one of you, since this is a Zoom meeting and anyone can speak, if you had any reactions or comments, or how has this resonated with you in terms of your experience in this recap?
Eric, Victoria. I just wanted to speak up and not be too much of a Susie Sunshine, but I got to say that there's some great people here, and we have to have hope and collaborative action. And I thought I'd just pipe in there. Like, I realize there's a lot of things going on in the world right now, but I think museums have a place in terms of helping people make sense of the world and figure out next steps in their lives.
Thanks, Victoria. Anyone else?
Kind of to echo what Victoria just said, I feel like throughout the conference and the session, I've just been really inspired to see, and I wrote this in the chat, but how many people are really committed to doing the work to learn and improve and be more inclusive and accepting. And I know we have a long way to go, but people have been pretty open about identifying those problems, which I think is a great first step. And I hope we can help hold each other accountable so that we actually put into practice these things that we're hoping to achieve.
Thanks, Jesse. Are there reactions or thoughts for the conversations that you may want to have in the next open space discussion?
It looks like Marta has her hand up. Marta?
Oh, I didn't see you.
Yes, hello. I want to say that I agree with many things you have said before. I think it's all about people, you know, how we can link the past and the present in museums, how we can link the objects with the audiences, with or people working in the museum. This is the most important thing. And how can we use digital to spread our collections or ideas or activities, or you know, how can we engage people on site, online? This is the idea. So I'm thinking in museums in a global way, physically and digitally, and you should engage people with all the tools you have. That's my idea.
That hybridity, is that a word, Ross? I heard you say that. I know it's hybrid, but the is that the word you use, hybridity? Did I hear this right?
Yeah, hybridity.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's what Marta was alluding to here. Any other reactions or comments about your experience at the conference?
Yeah, that notion of hybridity, and into Ross, your call of how we're going to self-assemble. You know, there's so much about the in-person experience that I know a lot of people have been missing, and but I also know that the in-person experience provides a lot of barriers to a lot of people, and I also know that the delivery of a lot of hybrid experiences, if they're meant to be, you know, at the same time, similar thing, are less than stellar. That being said, I would really love to be able to keep this global focus that we've have going with this, and the digital has been the way that we've been able to do that. Right, and the not in person is the way we've been able to do that, right? And so I'm wrestling with how can we retain some of those things that are specific to an in-person thing, but that also involve provide access to people who can't be there, right? For a number of reasons, whether it's distance, whether it's cost. Other things to consider, right? And that's kind of a big thing that I'm wrestling with.
Yeah, and it is for us, Max and everyone else here, you know, as we go into next year, we still don't know if, you know, what kind of events we should be planning for. I think that what I'm realizing is that the very definition of what a conference is has shifted in some ways, has atomized. And how do you deliver different perspectives, invite different people to the table and still have conversations that are relevant across the board is something we're grappling with internally at MCN in terms of what does an event next year look like. Hybrid, yeah, of course. I mean, that's a big word. It's easy to do that. It pauses also logistical challenges and business model challenges. If you do a hybrid conference, do you charge more for people who attend in person than people who attend remotely? I don't have an answer for it. I'm just asking the question here, and it's something that we're grappling with, and we still don't have an answer. And so much of the future still looks, it's very, very difficult to make predictions like more than 3 or 6 months out in this current environment where it's still very, very fluid in terms of pandemic, travel restrictions, COVID restrictions, etc. And we obviously haven't booked a hotel like in our traditional model, like we had done in previous years, and God knows that we actually fought really hard to get out of our commitment of our previous hotel contract, so we're not ready to sign another one. So what will an in-person event look like? So when you talk about a hybrid, it poses all these questions. Rachel has raised her hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of stick in. I don't disagree with pretty much anybody's anything that they've said in this session. But one thing that I do want to reflect back is that I feel like what was missing this year was a sense of like the collective hive mind that happens like in the looser and more like everyone's in the conference hotel together and out running into each other around the city at all of the places kind of way. Again, I don't have solutions for this. And I know that an in-person conference is not necessarily a feasible thing for so many reasons. But I do think that that is one thing that I really missed this year, and don't feel like a distributed model, like as convenient as it may be for everyone's lives to have shorter days in different time zones and shorter sessions. The collective joy and the thought sparking was really missing for me. And so I hope that doesn't get lost in the benefits of what the all digital and distributed model can bring is the other things that an in-person gathering brings that aren't just about being able to have the conversation in the same room.
Thanks, Rachel. And Andrea just put a comment in the chat, which I invite you to read as well, which is a good point. Marta, did you have your hand raised before, or you wanted to add something else? Just curious.
Yes, I would like to say about this, if the events will be hybrid in the future or not. I have been attending many events and I'm happy with, because being unemployed, if you have to travel, you can afford to attend so many events. So for me, 2020 was brilliant in the sense that it was possible for me to attend events that I have been dreaming about, and before it was not possible. So I think if you plan an hybrid event, you can reach more people that can travel because they don't want to. They want to fight against climate change, and they don't want to be pollute the environment. That people that can travel because they don't have money, because they can abandon their job during 1 week for the event, and in the timetable is different in the area they live from the event is celebrated. They can combine the work and the event. So I think for many reasons the events will be hybrid in the future. Can be on site because it's nice. I prefer to meet people on site and chat and have a coffee and things like that. But maybe you can for any reason, and then you have this hybrid possibility to attend the event And maybe this year you choose the online event, and then next year you will travel and you will be on site. You know, who knows?
Well, we shall see.
Yeah,
we shall see. We're at the top of the hour. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Lauren, and our 6 track leads. And over to open space discussion with Don, your host.